February 4th, 1982, a man named George Ritchie was officially declared dead. He had been sick, badly sick, double pneumonia. His temperature had spiked to a number that the human body simply cannot survive. His heart had stopped, his breathing had stopped, everything had stopped. The medical staff at the Army Hospital in Camp Barkley, Texas, did what they were trained to do. They documented it. Time of death noted, and a sheet was pulled over his face. And then, 9 minutes later, George Ritchie sat up. But that wasn't what shook him the most. What shook him the most was where he'd been and where he had just come back from. Near-death experiences, NDEs, you've probably heard the term. The tunnel of light, your life flashing before your eyes. A feeling of profound peace. Maybe you've dismissed it, a hallucination, a trick of a dying brain, the mind's final desperate firework display. That was the scientific consensus for a long time, and it's a perfectly reasonable place to land. But here's where it gets complicated. Because when you start looking at the actual accounts, not the vague, dreamy ones, but the specific, verifiable, documented ones, then you run into a problem. Some of these people are describing things they should have absolutely no way of knowing, and that is a very different kind of conversation. Her name was Pam Reynolds. She was 35 years old, a singer-songwriter from Atlanta when doctors discovered a massive aneurysm at the base of her brain, the kind that kills you if it ruptures, the kind where the surgery to fix it is almost as dangerous as leaving it alone. The procedure they needed to perform was called hypothermic cardiac arrest. In simple terms, they had to stop her heart, drain the blood from her brain, and lower her core body temperature to around 15 degrees Celsius, clinically dead, on purpose, for a controlled window of time. Her eyes were taped shut, moulded speakers were inserted into her ears, emitting constant clicking sounds, loud enough to drown out any external noise, and specifically designed to monitor brainstem function. Her brain was, by every measurable standard, completely offline. And yet, when Pam Reynolds woke up, she described the surgical saw used to open her skull. She described its shape, like a small electric toothbrush, she said, with interchangeable blades stored in what looked like a socket set. She described the exact words exchanged between her surgeons at a specific moment in the procedure. She described the appearance of her own femoral artery, as the doctor noted it was unexpectedly small. Every one of these details was later verified by her surgical team. Dr. Michael Sabom, a cardiologist who studied her case extensively, called it one of the most compelling and unexplainable NDE accounts in recorded medical history. How does a brain that is clinically not functioning perceive anything at all? Vicky Umapig was blind, not partially sighted, not legally blind, but blind from birth. She had never seen a single thing in her 32 years of life. She had no visual memory, no reference point to colour, light, space or faces. Yet in 1973 she was involved in a serious car accident. She was rushed to hospital, and for a short period of time her heart stopped. When she was resuscitated, Vicky described something remarkable. She said she had floated upward, looked down and seen her own body on the operating table for the first time in her life. She was able to describe the room, the staff. She even saw the long brown hair that spread out beneath her, something she had never been able to see before. She also described with some confusion looking at her own hands. She'd felt hands her entire life, but seeing them, well, that was entirely new. She reportedly described them as strange, beautiful, but strange. Researcher Kenneth Ring, who interviewed her for his landmark 1999 study Mindset, noted that Vicky's account was amongst the most challenging in the NDE literature, precisely because it couldn't be explained away by a visual cortex playing tricks. She had no functional visual cortex to trick. Colton Burpo was 4 years old when his appendix burst. By the time his parents got him to a hospital in Nebraska, he was in septic shock. The surgeon said it was touch and go. Colton survived, and then, slowly over the following months, he began telling his parents things. He told his father, Todd Burpo, a pastor, that during the surgery he had left his body and watched them from above as his father prayed alone in a small room and his mother made phone calls in a different room on the opposite side of the hospital. Colton described both scenes accurately. He had no way of knowing that they were separated. He was only 4 years old. Yet he told his parents that he had met a sister. He was an only child. His parents had never told him that their mother had suffered a miscarriage before he was born, a pregnancy they had grieved privately and never discussed with their son. And he described meeting his great-grandfather, a man called Pop, who had died decades before Colton was born. Colton had never seen a photo of him as a young man. Every image the family had showed Pop elderly with white hair. When Colton's father showed him a photo of Pop as a young man, a photo Colton had never seen, the boy identified him immediately. His family's story later became the book Heaven is for Real. Skeptics raised reasonable questions. Researchers raised reasonable questions, but the specific details, the miscarriage, the separated parents, the young grandfather, well, those are harder to explain away. In 2001, Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel published a landmark study in The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals on the planet. He tracked 344 cardiac arrest patients who had been successfully resuscitated. Of those, 62, roughly 18%, reported some form of NDE. Van Lommel noted something that troubled him. The experiences didn't correlate with the duration of cardiac arrest, or with medication, or with the fear of death beforehand. They seemed to occur independently of any measurable brain activity. His conclusion was careful, as good science should be, but it was also honest. The data, he said, suggested that consciousness might not be produced by the brain, but rather that the brain might act like a receiver, a radio picking up signals that exist independently of the hardware. In 2023, a team at New York University's Grossman School of Medicine published research in the journal Resuscitation that revealed something startling. In patients who had suffered cardiac arrest, researchers detected organized brain activity, specifically surges of gamma wave activity, up to an hour after resuscitation efforts had ceased. Gamma waves were associated with conscious awareness, memory retrieval, and complex information processing. The brain, in other words, may be doing something, even when by every clinical measure, it shouldn't be. What's perhaps most striking about NDEs across cultures, across centuries, across people who have never compared notes, is how consistent they are. The sensation of leaving the body, a review of one's life, not just a memory, but an emotional reliving, often from multiple perspectives, including the perspectives of people you may have hurt, a boundary or threshold, a point of no return, a sense of profound, absolute, unconditional love, and then a return, often unwanted. Most people who report NDEs say they did not want to come back, and almost universally, they are no longer afraid of death. Now, we should be honest here. We don't know what causes near-death experiences. We don't know if they represent actual contact with something beyond the physical life. The honest scientific answer, the only honest answer, is that we don't know. There are researchers who believe NDEs are complex neurological events, oxygen deprivation, endorphin floods, the temporal lobe misfiring under extreme stress, and these are legitimate hypotheses and should be taken seriously. But they don't fully account for the Pam Reynolds case. They don't account for Vicky Umipig seeing her own hands for the first time. They don't account for a 4-year-old describing a miscarriage his parents never mentioned. The philosopher David Chalmers once called consciousness the hard problem. The question of why there is a subjective experience at all. Why does the brain, a physical object, generate an inner world of feeling and perception? We genuinely don't know. Consciousness remains the one thing that science cannot fully account for. It has no agreed origin, no agreed mechanism. It simply is. And the things we cannot explain the beginning of, maybe we're not qualified to explain the end of either. George Ritchie lived until 2007. He spent the rest of his life as a psychiatrist and a man who had looked over the edge and come back. He'd never stopped talking about what he saw, not to convince anyone, just because he said it seemed important that people knew. He described returning to his body not as a relief, but as a kind of gentle disappointment, that wherever he had been, whatever it was, it had felt more real to him than anything that he had experienced in 60 years of living. These are human beings, doctors, children, singers, soldiers, who brushed against whatever comes next and came back changed, not broken, but changed. They don't all agree on the details. They come from different faiths, different countries, different centuries, but they tend to agree on one thing. There is something on the other side. Thank you for watching another episode of the Tinfoil Archives. If this has raised more questions than it has answered, that's a good thing. That's where the real investigation begins. Subscribe, like, and we'll keep going together. Until next time, truth seekers.